The wind carried the sharp crack of gunfire across the training range, echoing through the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert. The sun burned mercilessly above, baking the sand into glassy grains that shimmered with heat. Among the scattered trainees, one figure stood out, a woman standing at lane 7, motionless between each shot, eyes narrowed behind her visor, hands steady as stone. Her breathing was slow, controlled, and precise. She wasn't just practicing, she was remembering. Her name was Lieutenant Emma Hayes, though no one at the range seemed to know or care much about her. To them, she was just another reservist trying to qualify for a weapons certification. She was quiet, polite, and kept mostly to herself. But there was something about the way she handled that rifle, a precision that seemed almost too perfect, too disciplined, like someone who had spent years depending on that trigger for survival. Her movements were clean, methodical, and chillingly calm. Behind her, a small group of new recruits whispered among themselves. They had no idea who she was. To them, she was just that woman who keeps to herself. They didn't know she'd once worn a uniform marked with a trident, not officially, but in honor. They didn't know that the name Hayes still haunted certain corridors in Coronado, whispered quietly among men who had once called her Phantom Angel. 3 years earlier, Emma had been one of the Navy's most respected combat medics, attached to a special operations unit that often worked alongside the SEALs. She wasn't a SEAL herself, but she'd been through more hell than most of them. On her last deployment, her team was ambushed deep in hostile territory. She saved 7 men that day, all bleeding, all broken, using nothing but grit, bandages, and the kind of courage that no training could teach. But when the dust cleared, her commanding officer, Commander James Callahan, never came home. Emma blamed herself. She left active duty 6 months later, citing personal reasons, but the truth was simpler. The war had followed her home, and she didn't know how to live with it anymore. Now she stood at the range, just trying to feel something again. The rifle, the recoil, the smell of gunpowder, it was all that remained of who she used to be. Each shot was like a confession, each target a memory she was trying to silence. At the far end of the range, a black SUV pulled up quietly, unnoticed by most of the trainees. Out stepped a tall man in a Navy uniform, his posture sharp, his face weathered by decades of service. The patch on his arm bore the unmistakable gold trident of the SEALs. Commander Nathan Rourke, head of the Western SEAL Training Command, had come to oversee a surprise evaluation. The recruits froze when they saw him, murmuring his name under their breath. But his eyes weren't on them. They were fixed on the woman in lane 7. He watched her for several minutes, arms crossed, saying nothing. The precision, the discipline, it was all too familiar. She reloaded with the fluid confidence of someone who had done it thousands of times. Then she fired a perfect string of shots, dead center, each one cutting through the last hole until the paper was more empty than whole. When she finally lowered her weapon, she caught his reflection in the plexiglass divider. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she froze. There was something in that look, recognition. Not of rank, but of pain. She'd seen those eyes before, years ago, on men who had lost more than they could say. Rourke walked slowly toward her lane, hands behind his back. The other instructors stepped aside, whispering in confusion. No one knew why the commander was approaching a lone reservist. He stopped behind her, silent for a long time. She didn't move. Her target swayed gently in the breeze, a single bullet hole dead center in the black. Finally, Rourke spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" She didn't turn around. "Here and there, sir." Her tone was respectful but distant, as if she were guarding something sacred. He stepped closer, his eyes flicking to the name patch on her gear, Hayes. His breath caught slightly. "Hayes," he repeated under his breath, the name dragging old memories from deep places. "Emma Hayes." She said nothing, but the silence was enough. He took a slow breath, his throat tightening. "You served with Callahan, didn't you?" Her hands clenched slightly around the rifle. "A long time ago, sir." "I knew Callahan," Rourke said softly. He spoke about a medic who pulled his team through hell. Said she carried more courage in her pinky than most men carried in their whole bodies. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. He called her the Iron Angel. Emma closed her eyes. It had been years since she'd heard that name. It wasn't a title she'd ever wanted, it was something her team had called her after that final mission, something that made her heart ache every time she remembered it. "I'm no angel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I couldn't save him, Rourke stood in silence for a moment. Then, without a word, he stepped in front of her, his boots crunching softly in the sand. He looked at her for a long time, studying the face that carried both strength and sorrow in equal measure. And then, to everyone's shock, the SEAL commander slowly raised his hand in salute. Every conversation at the range went silent. The trainees froze, staring in disbelief. A SEAL commander, saluting a woman most of them thought was just a reservist. It didn't make sense, but to him, it made perfect sense. That salute wasn't for her rank. It was for her sacrifice, her courage, her silence. It was for every life she had saved and every piece of herself she had lost along the way. Emma didn't know what to do. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred, and for the first time in years, she felt something crack open inside her. Tears welled up and spilled freely as she slowly returned the salute, her hands trembling, her heart aching. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. After that day, things changed quietly. She didn't talk about it, and neither did Rourke. But she began to show up at the range more often, mentoring younger recruits who struggled with focus or fear. She wasn't just shooting anymore, she was teaching, guiding, healing in her own way. The same woman who had once wanted to disappear was now giving others a reason to believe in themselves. Months later, when the SEALs held a memorial for fallen heroes, Commander Rourke personally requested that she attend. She stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as Callahan's name was read aloud. When Rourke found her afterward, she simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you." He returned the same quiet salute from that day at the range, a gesture that said more than words ever could. Sometimes, the strongest warriors aren't the ones who charge into battle, but the ones who keep standing long after it's over. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like and share it. Your support helps keep these real and emotional stories alive for others who need to hear them. One special request to comment. If you've ever met someone whose quiet strength inspired you, a teacher, a soldier, a friend, or even a stranger, share their story in the comments below. Someone out there might need that inspiration today. And as the sun sets over that silent range, the echoes of a single salute remind us all, heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes, they just keep showing up.